and then we can obviously send that to any of your colleagues who didn't make the webinar this evening. And I'll just check to see if anybody else is due on. No. Okay, so the first thing to mention is that if you are using the CD version and you want the updated version, everything sits online now. So if you are contemplating using the scheme, you wouldn't receive a CD, you would actually access it online. And if you were to contact our admin assistant, she'll take you through the process. You basically need a Google ID and you will be taken onto a portal. Now, everything sits on the internet, so you can access it from the web. This is what it would look like. But equally, if your school has a Google Drive, what you can do is almost have a mirror copy on your school computer so that you can access everything. And if you were to download it onto your school computer, it will take a couple of days to upload because there's so much in there. But we can give you more details about that later. So you can see the way it's designed in the portal is that there is a section with the lesson plans, lesson resources, and all the teachers' resources. So if you like, it's split into 3 columns across each year group. So I'm going to pass on to Wendy now, because if you've already been using the scheme, the standard scheme, that has already undergone some updates online, and Wendy's going to take over now and just explain a bit about what we've actually done with the lesson plans. And I, meanwhile, will look at any messages and keep letting people in. I think we're on 30 now, or near enough. Okay, Wendy.
Okay, thanks, Juliet, and good afternoon, everybody. It's really good to see so many people here. So I wanted just to explain how the lesson plan works, and if you're new to it, well, you can see it now and have a look at it. We've got things like key vocab on the right hand side. We've got the learning outcomes. We've got a description of what you can do in the lesson, and further down you've got a list of resources that come in the resources folder. And then just down on the right hand side you can see the age-related expectations, which is new to anyone who's already been using it. We've now changed it. We no longer have things like the Key Stage 3 framework links, because although that was quite good in its day, obviously we've moved on to a new terminology. And I will just say to everybody how lucky you are, actually. You don't always realise perhaps, but having Kay and Sam working with you in the East Riding, I think you have got support that is second to none, actually, across the country. And actually, Kay and Sam have worked on some age-related expectations, we know, and they kindly let us use those as a sort of basis, although we have developed them slightly, but their ideas were sort of foundational and really helpful in helping us think through that. So a few people asked us when we ran this webinar last night, how long should a lesson take? And I am aware that many of you are in different contexts. So a few years ago, when I used to teach in a primary school, I was only given half an hour per class, and I had to go into lots of different classes and teach half an hour. You could do this in half an hour. You might have to cut out a couple of activities or games. Equally, you could stretch it out and make it last around an hour. I would say the ideal would be around 40 to 45 minutes. If you can have that time, that would be great, and that means you're not rushing. But obviously, as experienced teachers know, we often sort of expand or contract teaching to fit the time that we have available. And if you are the class teacher, you could take one of the games perhaps and do that during the week at a separate time if you don't have more than that half hour. But as I said, I think 40 minutes would be great for this. You want to move on, Julia? Thanks.
Yeah.
And then there is an overview. So if you wanted to sort of quickly look across the weeks of the year, we have got 30 weeks of lessons, so 1 to 30, plus an extra. We've got a Christmas and an Easter lesson, so you just slot that in as and when you can, when it's appropriate. And the reason we haven't got the full 39 weeks is we find that people often lose weeks during the course of the school year. So rather than you feeling that you needed to somehow rush and catch up, we've done slightly less. And if you end up with a bit more time, you can always go back and revisit. There's lots of songs and stories and nice activities in there that you can more than, if you've got some extra time, you can go back, because as we all know, reusing a song or a story is just really good practice, because it means that the children have access to that language again. In this version, this is one of the mixed age versions. So Again, many years ago when I did teach in a primary school, it was a mixed age primary school, and I used to have 2 year groups in one class. I had year 1 and 2 together, 3 and 4 together, and 5 and 6 together. We know that lots of mixed ages could look different. Some of you might have 3 year groups or even 4 year groups in the class. So we've mainly included a standard version, a stretch and a challenge, that's when it's going up, or a standard and then a stretch and a support if you've got younger children in there. And then we've got, for the year 6 version, we've got a support and then a more simplified basic version for children who might be much newer to it. So we have sort of thought carefully and mapped across the different activities. We've made sure things like greetings, for example, which you wouldn't normally teach more than once, get revisited if you've got mixed age classes. And we've colour coded it so you can quite easily have a quick look and you can see how the colours link to the different stretch or challenge activities. If you want to move on, Julia. And then that's a similar version, but the standard version, so you haven't got it in the different colours because that's the standard. Thanks. And then that's, so a lesson plan that's got mixed age is obviously longer because we've had to put more into it. If you can see that on there where we've got the description of the lesson, you've got some writing in different colours, and that relates to the stretch or the support. So the green writing is around challenge and the blue writing in there is support. So it means that your eye can quickly be taken to the bits that are a bit different than the rest of the class. And then equally, the age-related expectations, we've put those in for each of the different year groups as well. If you want to move on, thanks. And then that's another example. This one is a year 6 lesson plan, and then that's got 4 different levels of simplification depending on which other year groups you've got in your lesson there. Julia, is that me passing back to you now?
Yeah, so this is just, if you aren't an overly confident linguist, just to mention, as I did mention earlier, there are a number of mechanisms in place to give you support. And the first thing to mention is when you go into a lesson folder, particularly in the years 3 and 4, you'll notice that there is a subfolder called sound files. And within that folder, you have a number of WAV files that are basically the audio of the key vocabulary that's going to be delivered in that lesson. So some teachers just tend to click through that before a lesson, even though you don't actually have to lead the teaching of the lesson yourself as such, because a lot of sound files are built into every single resource, particularly the PowerPoints. And so you don't actually have to produce the language, you can just rely on the sound within the resource. Wendy, do you want to just mention this before I introduce some of the materials?
Yes, so as I sort of mentioned previously, we've worked on a set of age-related expectations, and we've really developed something that I believe that in East Riding you've already seen. So we've got year 3 to 6, and then rather than just have listen, what we felt was really useful that Kay and Sam came up with was the idea of different types of listening. So listen and understand, listen and recount, identifying the sound spelling link, and then also transcribe. So you're listening and then writing down what you hear. And then moving on, we've got speak, which is more of a presentation type activity. Listen and speak is more a conversation because you hear a question and then answer it. And then we've got different types of writing because children will be able to write more or less depending on how much support they're given. So we have write with support, which will be with something like a sentence builder, which we'll show you later. We've got write independently where they have no support at all. So obviously we'd expect less. Adapting a written model, which again will be quite easy because you're just substituting individual words usually, and then translating, which could be from the target language or French or Spanish into English or vice versa. Moving on, then we've got grammar. We've got a whole big section of grammar, looking at all the different types of grammar learning and how children can make progress. I'll just pull out a really key one, which is verbs. So using high frequency verbs just in the I form would be the very simplest level. That then moves into things like the I, you, he, she form of the same verb. And then to make it even more challenging, we move into different tenses. So by year 6, children will be able to should be able to say things like I went or I did. That can just be in the I form, and I'm going to do, or I'm going to go, something like that. So very simple future tense as well. And as long as they can even just say that in the I form, that's absolutely fine. It means that they've accessed different tenses, and that shows quite a high level of progress. And then finally, we've got cultural capital. This is something that language teachers have always taught. We often used to call it intercultural understanding, but as we all probably know now, that the new Ofsted term is cultural capital. So we've got a section in there. And even if children learn about that in English, they're developing their understanding of the world, such as through traditions and festivals. And it wouldn't just be in France and Spain, it would also be French and Spanish speaking countries. So for example, if you're teaching French, there will be things around the Mardi Gras in Guadeloupe, which is an island in the Caribbean where they speak French. And it will be things like the Day of the Dead in Mexico. So they're learning, they're broadening their horizons, which is all part of what we should be teaching. So passing back to Juliet now.
Okay, so as we have been revisiting the resources, and thank you very much again to Kay and Sam for helping us out with the initial draft version. As we've been creating the differentiated resources, what we've done is we've looked very carefully at those age-related expectations, and we've kept adding and modifying them as we've gone along, so they are fairly fine-tuned. So what I want to start with now is to look at year 3 as the starting point. One question was asked earlier about if I am teaching mixed age groups, or if I'm introducing this scheme, do I teach year 3, 4, 5 and 6 straight away? Well, there's no problem in starting with the year 3 scheme and running that with other year groups. Often phasing the scheme in would be better, because once I show you where we get to with the year 6 scheme, you realise there's quite strong progression throughout each year scheme. So starting with year 3 is fine. And also we did have some questions earlier this week about, could it be used in Key Stage 1? Oops, I do apologise. But yes, you can use this with year 2, for example, or even year 1, and just be judicious in the bits that you pick out. So you can see here we've got vocabulary such as greeting people, animals, colours, numbers up to 15, teaching children how to express their likes, dislikes, and also using conjunctions and but and also in order to be able to extend their responses or their sentences. In terms of grammar, I have and I am, very, very key high frequency verbs. I like, I love, I hate, and I don't like. Also, we focus on the feminine and masculine, the words are, the, and some, and we also teach them singular and plural. Adjectival agreements are obviously very important, so that's why we use animals and introduce colours, because they're a really good way to introduce children to this concept. I've mentioned the negative and also the opinion, the conditional phrase, I would like. So that's what we cover in year 3. Now, we don't explicitly teach grammar because that would probably turn many learners off. So what we do is introduce it in a fun way through lots of repetition, stories, games, songs, etc. So by the end of year 3, this is the kind of text or what children would be able to say if they were in a speaking test or just practicing in the lesson. So you can see a greeting, asking how somebody is, giving their name and their age, describing pets with colours, and also saying what they like, they dislike, as well as what they would like. So that gives you an indication of where they would be. That would be an example in French of exactly the same text. And that would be the example in Spanish. Okay, so let's just have a look at how we would approach this sort of language in year 3, so you can see the gradual build-up. And if anything, this is just to reassure any of you that are not feeling overly confident how we gradually build up and what scaffolding is in there and support for teachers. Before I do that, I'll just mention we do have an app available that runs alongside the scheme. It can either be used in lessons or it could be used by children at home if they have iPhones or iPads. It's downloadable off the App Store and it's called French Language Builder 1 or Spanish Language Builder 1. You can see the sections on the right there covering phonics, when he's going to talk to you a bit more about that later. The vocabulary, the main vocabulary that comes up, the main topics, of which there are 16 topic areas. Within each topic area, then there are 16 different activities. So if you like, that's 16 topics times 16 activities. Many of them, I'll show you the pictures and screenshots in a minute, are just getting children to practice vocabulary or short sentences. Grammar we cover also, and we focus on gender in that grammar section. Sentence building is where we get learners to extend sentences, and there is an alphabet section. That's not something we really cover until towards the end of year 6, because the alphabet can be quite difficult to master. But what children enjoy doing is just tapping on the letters of, for example, their first name or surname, and learning how they would spell their name, or how they would spell where they live, for example. So that's just a fun element that we've built in. These are screenshots. As you can see, in the middle is the phonics section. And then on the top, on either side, is one of the sentence builder. And then on the bottom, you have the vocabulary sections. That's a whack-a-mole in the middle that comes up at the end of the 16 activities. And the one on the right is where they're matching words. And well, actually, I think what they do there, they hear sound and they click on the right word. So there's matching, dragging and dropping, typing in various bits and pieces. So it's quite different on every activity, and many of it is image driven. So they have to match, say, the sound they hear to the image that they can see, or they match the words to the image. So we come back at the words and sentences in many different ways. So in the early stages of year 3, as I mentioned, we introduce animals, key nouns, and as you can see here, there are a number of audio icons at the bottom.
Une tortue.
Is that playing, Wendy?
Un serpent.
Good, okay. So for an activity like this, it's just children looking at the 7 animals, listening to the sounds.
Un chat.
And you can see they're out of order.
Un chien.
So they've got to basically spot which animal it is. If they were using mini whiteboards, they might be writing the word down with the word un or une in front, or they might just put their hand up and tell you which animal it is. So that's how we start at noun level. And then over a sequence of lessons, they start to build up to sentence level. And what they would do if you were a teacher not overly confident, or even if you were, because it's good to expose children to different voices, you play the sound.
Voici un cochon et un chat.
So again, the children would try and write it, or they might repeat it first, and then they would see
Voici
it.
un cochon et un chat.
So we often play the sound first, then they hear it again, but with the words, so that they can match the sound with the spelling. And you'll notice there it's color coded. At this stage, we haven't mentioned anything about masculine or feminine. That comes later on in the scheme. And in the notes section, underneath every PowerPoint slide is a translation, so that teachers are not left wondering what something means, particularly if the children ask you for clarification. Alongside everything that's built into the PowerPoints, etc., we have support mats. So this can be printed off, can be used for all children or just your lower ability children. There are collaborative games. So this one, for example, would be a snakes and ladders, where children have to basically say voici, here is, and then or aquí está, for example, or aquí hay, and they would just be talking about the animals, and they would just be practicing in numbers 1, 2 and 3 at this stage. So gradual introduction. We use stories on a regular basis, and as primary teachers you will be used to the power of stories. For us, they're very good for introducing the flow, the language, the patterns in the language. There's lots of repetition in our stories, and a lot of visuals to help children work out what's going on. We also use very well-known stories such as Little Red Riding Hood, The Enormous Turnip, because children often already know the plot, the basic story, and again that helps them work out the meaning. So we're going to look at this pet shop story. Many of you will be familiar with it if you've already been teaching with the scheme this year. So there are cognates in there, words that are similar in English and the target language. good visuals to help the learners work out the meaning. There are translations under every slide, as I mentioned earlier, but also the transcripts are there available in the documents, which can be printed off or just looked at before the lesson.
Au magasin des animaux.
So I'll just click this so that you can follow it through, and then we'll look at Taught for Writing and how this might be used.
Pierre va au magasin des animaux. Il voudrait un animal.
Je voudrais un animal.
Voici un lapin, mais
Il est bizarre.
il refuse le lapin.
Non, merci.
Il regarde une tortue, mais
Elle est aussi bizarre.
il refuse la tortue.
Non, merci.
Voici un serpent, mais
Il est dangereux.
il refuse le serpent.
Non, merci.
Il regarde un chat, mais
Il est orange.
il refuse le chat.
Non, merci.
Il regarde une souris, mais
Elle est petite.
il refuse la souris.
Non, merci.
Il regarde un cochon, mais
Il est énorme.
il refuse le cochon.
Non, merci.
Finalement, il regarde un chien.
Il est cool.
Il achète le chien.
Au revoir.
Okay, so you saw lots of visuals, colour-coded words, lots of repetition. And if you're familiar with Pi Corbett's Taught for Writing, you'll know that speaking is often used to support writing. So what we have here on the screen is the full script from that story. And what we have here is that story turned into a text map. As I say, this is very much a Taught for Writing methodology. And what you're now going to see is a teacher called Louise St. John, who was an AST in Plymouth, and she's very effectively showing here how, with that text map that she has on the board that you can see on this video clip, she's getting the children to basically recite the whole story. She does use actions as well, so we're going to have a listen to see how effective this is. So lovely pronunciation there from the children who have probably only been doing French for about 4 or 5 weeks at this stage. So good pronunciation. Another thing that we often build into the resources is songs, excuse me, and we work with the Language Factory. We have a partnership with them. Their songs are really good and relate very much to a lot of the topics that we cover. This just happens to be a Year 4 one where we introduce parts of the body. I'll see if I can play this. You'll recognise the tune.
Brazo derecho, brazo derecho, brazo izquierdo, brazo izquierdo, palma arriba, Macarena. ¡Ay! Mano derecha, mano derecha, mano izquierda, mano derecha, sobre la cabeza, Macarena. ¡Ay!
Okay, so a lot of songs, always the lyrics in both languages available. Sometimes the songs come with a video clip where you can watch the children actually doing actions to the songs, but they're a great way to reinforce the vocabulary that we cover in the various topic areas. Something that we think is very important is that the children can show evidence of progress throughout each scheme. And so we have a work booklet. Now, we used to have on the top of the work booklets on the front page, Year 3, 4, 5, 6, What we've now done is change it to stage 1, 2, 3, 4. The reason being then that gives you the flexibility to use each scheme across different year groups. That's an example out of the workbooklet, and you can see that relates to the story that we've just been watching. And also at the end of each year, we have an assessment booklet. We understand from discussions with primary teachers, and also we've had discussions with Sam and Kay, that some teachers do the assessment, some don't bother. I think it depends on your school. But what we have there, if you want them, is assessments at the end of the year in all 4 language skills, with the sound file for the listening, and also a marks scheme. We are updating the marks scheme, taking out the national curriculum levels, and we're going to add the age-related expectations in there. So that's there to use in the teachers folder, and it tends to also appear about lessons 28 and 29 when the actual assessments kick in. So over to you now, Wendy. Phonics is a key part of our scheme. She's going to introduce how this fits into the lessons.
Okay, thanks, Juliet. So I'm sure, as you know, that phonics is the methodology that is used to teach children to read and write in English, and it's also a really effective way to teach them in French and Spanish. Now, Spanish is 99% phonetic, so you're really lucky if you teach Spanish. I teach both French and Spanish, and I would say that Spanish is easier and more accessible because it's so phonetic. French isn't quite so phonetic because it's got the issue of the silent letters at the ends of words. However, French still does follow a very strict system. So, for example, whenever you see the OI sound in French, it's always the wa sound. Whenever you see the CH, it's always sh. Whereas in English, as we know, the CH sound could be ch as in church, it could be sh as in machine, it could be k as in choir. So English is very mixed up. It's only 40% phonetic, and that's why children struggle much more when you're having to teach them in English. If you just move on, Juliet, to the next slide. Obviously, we all know that phonics is about making the relationship between what you see and what it sounds like. And I would say it's really important to start teaching this quite early on. And we do start it right in year 3. The reason is that if not corrected, the children will quickly pick up the wrong pronunciation because they'll basically just use English pronunciation. And once they've started that and got into the habit of it, it's really hard to correct that. So it's important to get that started straight away. And in year 3, we use a really simple technique where we teach them an action that relates to a particular sound, and we take some of the key vowel sounds, the key sounds that children find difficult, that are very different between French and English, and we use a technique that's used in France actually for dyslexic children. It's called the Borel-Maisonneuve technique. And we came across a lady, she's a French native speaker, but she teaches in an English school called Marie-Pierre, and she uses it to great effect. And we sort of taught to her, we developed this technique, and we also videoed her demonstrating it. So we're going to play a video to show you. So in a way, if you don't want to, you don't have to, you can just play the video, or you can demonstrate it yourself to your own children.
On met le doigt en l'air et on dit « I ». Mardi, voici, aussi, souris, gris, stylo.
So as you can see from that example, the letter I and also Y actually is pronounced E in French, which is a bit confusing, as you can imagine, because when you hear it, you want to write the letter E. And so the way that the action is like this, E, so she's holding the finger there, and that also relates to the letter I, so it looks like it. She would have that as the letter A, for example. They're quite obvious ones. But in French, you also have nasal sounds. So that's when you've got an N after vowels. So you've got IN, UN, AN, and so on. And so one example would be that she takes the same letter I, but touches the nose, because that reminds you that it's a nasal sound, and she would say, ah. And that's a really good sort of action and that will help children remember it. And then when you've got the letter A, it goes like that, and then you touch the nose, it goes en. So that will be an example of how we teach some of those. The R is a R sound, and we touch the throat because you should hear your throat vibrate a little bit if you're saying the R correctly, both in French and Spanish. So we use that same technique in Spanish as well, and we take some of the key sounds during year 3 and teach them. If you want to move on, Juliet. And then in year 4 and into year 5, we take all the most difficult sounds in the language. So French has 36 different phonemes in it. English, by the way, has 44 if you're interested, and Spanish, I think, if memory serves me correctly, has about 32. But they're not all difficult because many of those sounds are very similar or identical. So the M sound in French, Spanish, and English is the same. The P sound is the same. The S sound is the same. So we don't really concentrate on those because children won't find any problems with those. We just concentrate on the sounds that are difficult for non-native speakers, and they're nearly always the vowel sounds, as you can imagine. In Spanish, they're things like the J, the Ch sound in Spanish, for example. And we use a technique called planet phonique or planetas fonéticas in Spanish, and we relate every sound is a planet. So la planète wa, la planète u, la planète un, for example. Obviously not real planets. We do need to make sure our children don't think we're inventing a whole new solar system and they go home and tell their parents that, you know, they've discovered some new planets. But a nice way to do this is that you could have a little display that could look like what you can see. So you could have the different planets there. And then when you come across new words, you could write those words in and stick them on the planet. And that will help the children relate the sound to the words as well. So when we're teaching a short section of a planet phonique, it probably would take about 10 to 15 minutes in a lesson. And we've inserted this in throughout the course in year 4 and year 5. If you want to move on, Juliet. So we go and visit La Planète. And again.
La planète Noire.
We'll be listening to Star Wars for the rest of the session. And then we ask the children, if you just move on, Juliet, if they can think
Can
of...
you think of any words with the wa sound in?
And if we start this in year 4, it means the children have had about a year of year 3 learning some words. And it's important that they have some language to sort of hook their learning on. So they'll have words for greetings, animals, parts of the bodies, numbers up to 15, colours, for example. And the good thing about this is that they can start thinking, and I get them to shut their eyes or put their heads down so they're not looking around the room, and they have to think of lots of words with that sound in. And then we have a look at some of those words.
Trois. Croissant.
Noir,
Poisson. Oiseau.
And in this way, we are grouping words by sound, which is how children are taught phonics in reception in year 1, as you probably know. It's also really good revision. So we're not grouping them by topic as we normally do, and it helps them sort of bring back to mind. And I would write those words on the board when the children told me them and draw a square or a circle to highlight the focus phoneme. And then the next activity is a listening activity. This is a very simple one here because it's the first one in the series, and this would just be where children hear 2 words and they just have to identify, is it the first word or the second word that has that sound in. So here we're not listening for meaning, we're just listening for a sound, and it's what's called a micro listening activity, and it helps children develop the skills later on to then work out what that would look like and then link it to a word that has meaning.
La Côte d'Ivoire. Le Cameroun.
And then we just tell them, was it the first or second? Obviously it was the first one here, La Côte d'Ivoire. Now a more difficult activity but very similar, and another one would be where they would listen to a song or a rhyme and they would tally perhaps the number of times they heard the sound, or you can get them to touch their head or do some action when they hear the sound, so they are responding to that in a different way. And then the next activity is a speaking activity. It could be a rhyme or a tongue twister that has lots of examples of the focus phoneme. So if we have a listen to this one.
Il était une fois un homme de foi qui vendait du foie dans la ville de Foix. Il dit, ma foi, c'est la dernière fois que je vends du foie dans la ville de Foix.
Thanks, Juliet. Now that's a nice example actually of silent letters at the ends of words, which is the S and the X in this example. And this is a very famous tongue twister. It's a bit like she sells seashells on the seashore that lots of French children will learn. And I would ask the children to have a go at being able to present that and say it. And if they're very young children, maybe just the first line or so. If they're in year 6, I get them to do the whole lot if they can. But you have to sort of practice it quite a few times with them so they've heard it a few times before they can go away and do it themselves. And if you have any sort of recording device, you could get them to record it, say into the iPad, or I have a little memory stick that acts as a voice recorder as well. And then it's quite nice to listen back to it as well if you have time to do that. Okay, and then finally we give them a series of words that they probably haven't come across before, but the idea is that they are developing the skills so they can now use their knowledge of the OI sound and apply it to new language, which is the whole point of this, so that they build up that knowledge, and when they come to unseen language, they can read it and pronounce it accurately. And it really does work. I used it over a number of years, and by the end of it, my children who were leaving year 6, I could give them a piece of language and they could read it out correctly. And that is a fantastic gift. If you're a secondary teacher listening, you will say if they can start year 7 and be able to pronounce the language correctly, that's a fantastic place to start, because children so often struggle with pronunciation, even at GCSE level. Okay, so moving on, thanks Juliet. We also have got a link with Oxford University Press, and we looked at lots of different dictionaries, and we feel that this is the best dictionary for Key Stage 2 learners. So if you do have some budget to buy a dictionary, and you purchase the iLanguages scheme, we can give you a discount code which gets you 2 for the price of 1. So the price is £8.99, so essentially you would get a dictionary for £4.50. I've checked it on Amazon and it's something like £7.70, so you're still getting a discount compared to Amazon. And if you move on, Juliet, we do some dictionary activities, and these are projected up on the screen. If you don't manage to be able to buy the dictionaries, you can still develop dictionary skills by projecting these pages from the dictionary and then going through the sorts of activities with the children. So you're teaching them how to access and use a dictionary. And what we really like about this one is the colour coding. So you've got the French or the Spanish in red, you've got the English in blue, and then you've got some further explanation in black. So we think it's really easy to understand because of the colour coding there. And Juliet's just sort of talking us through, these are some very simple activities, but we have a series of different dictionary activities that start in year 4 and continue into year 5. And then if we move on, what we liked about this as well is it's got little tips like a language tip with a key. It's got things like cultural information, so you've got the little pink bit there that tells you a little bit about the culture. They're also revitalising the dictionary currently, and we're working with them to make sure that all of the vocab in our scheme is in their dictionary as well. Okay, thanks Julia. I think I'm passing back to you now.
Okay, so in terms of cultural capital, and bearing in mind not all children get the opportunity to travel abroad, as we mentioned earlier, we do have a series of video clips. They were filmed in Bordeaux and Alicante. The top left one, of course, is in Pamplona. And in and amongst these, we also have embarrassing video clips of me doing the talk for writing actions. If you're less confident about leading a talk for writing activity, that's me on the top right when I had normal or blonde hair before I went to the hairdressers. Also, we have an animated clip here, and this, I won't play it because it might be slightly stilted, but this is a clip of some little characters describing what they like and they don't like, and the children seem to quite like these. And then this is one of the examples, just a screenshot of a video clip that was taken of children in Bordeaux. And this is in a primary school. Well, it's more actually like a primary and junior school. And they did a whole series of clips for us. They describe times of the day, what their favourite subjects are, what items are in the classroom. They also describe themselves in terms of their hair, their eye colour and their height. And so we've got some lovely clips that run right up to year 6. Now, we're just going to move on to now talking to you about the work that we've both been doing over the last couple of months. This has kept us incredibly busy and has been quite challenging, but we're quite pleased with what we've produced so far. So as Wendy mentioned, she showed you how the colour coding works on the lesson plans, because obviously some of the lessons require slightly higher level or a broader range of activities for older children, and other resources require a simplified version. So some of the things have gone up in difficulty, some of the things have dropped down. So we've had to think about each year group in isolation. Now, what we have done also is boosted some of the content for the older children up into year 6. I was reading some really interesting research that's been done recently on primary children. This isn't just to do with languages, but the fact that by the time they get into year 5 and 6, they've moved on from that year sort of key stage 1 and into key stage 3, 4, enjoying lots of games, lots of fun style activities. And what children do enjoy as they get older into 5 and 6 is something that's a lot a bit more structured and reflective, where they can take ownership and some independence over their learning, and where they can really feel a sense of achievement, because progression is really crucial to keeping and sustaining their motivation. So we're conscious of the fact that if you do have years 3, 4, 5 and 6 all mixed in a class, those older children, and even if you're using the standard scheme with just year 5 or 6, need something potentially more challenging. So we're going to show you some ideas based on recent pedagogical thinking, and this, you know, will hopefully support your learners. So a simple way where we might build differentiation would be, for example, in year 3, where children are learning how to give their name. What we would do is build some extra sentences in the stretch and challenge sections at the bottom. You can see the stretch is in, which would be aimed at year 4 into year 5 in the orange, and then the year 6 or year 5 into 6 would be in the green. So while the children are listening to the Je m'appelle, studying the footballer, the older learners might be looking at their respective sentences, and we will be embedding sound files into these. And there's nothing to stop the younger learners also thinking about what the meaning might entail. We also, it's worth mentioning, is that because we're putting the resources online, it means we can keep things updated. A head teacher from a primary school that's using our resources in Plymouth mentioned a couple of months back, he said, oh, some of those footballers, are you aware that they've retired? Well, I'm not a football spectator at all, but what we have done is updated these in line with the current teams, and that's what we're planning to do now that it's online. Each year we're going to revisit certain sections of the scheme. So you can see how we've built in, for example, countries, family members, and also the birthdays. So we've got months and dates in there for the older children. Slightly more complex there in the green at the bottom, but it's something that potentially year 6s would be able to work out. And this one obviously is a birthday, but also the fact he's a Muslim and that his 2 brothers play football as well. And now we're going on to a parallel text activity. So this is the story you saw earlier in year 3, the pet shop story. So if you had more competent or older year 6 children in that class, while the younger children, for example, might be working in their work booklet, doing the activities, you might project this up or print it off for the older children so that they can do some find the phrases. And using exactly the same text, they may do a spot the intruder. So this is where we've changed slight words or even spellings, and the idea is for the children to look for those. And what it does, it trains children to become much better at reading and much better at looking for detail, which is a key skill that they will need by the time they get to GCSE. And so all the answers come up on the board. You'll be able to project this for children to check. And then finally a vocab matching activity. And this again would be potentially where dictionaries might come in, as well as them studying the parallel text. This is called a speaking ladder, and this is something I use quite a lot with my children. The idea being here that when the, let's say, younger learners are studying how to give months and dates, what the older children can do, and this is a challenge version, this is the higher level version of the 2 upper versions, if you like. they would be practicing the same content in terms of months and dates, because the start of the lesson would be a little starter on it, so they could join in with that. But then they could become a break-off group, the older children. And what you have here is lots of repetition, but introducing it was, today, tomorrow, and it will be. So the children would be practicing some really good key grammar here. Now, we are aware that children might need a little bit of support. So our plan is to record some audio this summer so that children, for example, could sit around an iPad or a computer and listen to some of these sentences being read out. And then the idea being that they work in pairs or groups, they fold the sheet over, they study the French, work out what they don't understand, then they turn it over and look at the English. And eventually, and this is all written into the lesson plan, they would do some paired speaking practice. But as I mentioned earlier, the sound file would be there and available to make sure they don't fall into any pronunciation traps. A similar idea for helping them recycle language is a sentence builder. Again, these are very popular in secondary school now. The idea being that you help children develop extended sentences by chunking the information up. So this would be introduced into, I think it's year 4 or 5, where, I think it's 5 actually, year 5, where the children would be learning weather. And so the year 6 children who've already, say, done weather, but they've already done days of the week, opinions and activities, obviously family members and opinions, reasons, will be able to go and work independently using a sentence builder. And we've built all sorts of ways of how to effectively use a sentence builder. Again, we will have some sound files in there. So for example, we may record a native speaker reading several different mixing and matching bits of the sentences, and the children might have to basically write what they hear. So it's almost like a dictation. Then they could do the translations, and then finally they could test each other. So they could say, how do you say on Monday it's hot? If it's hot, I prefer, etc. Now, what they could also do is do it the other way around. They can read it out in the target language first. The children might write it down, but it can be used as a translation both ways. This activity is a Kagan activity. If you're not familiar with Spencer Kagan, he is an American educational psychologist who has looked at how to get children, learners, to work effectively in pairs or groups. As we're well aware as teachers, sometimes you find that a more able or a more confident learner will take over and dominate an activity. The way Spencer Kagan's designed his structures is to give equal responsibility, if you like, where children are all playing a part in an activity, but also being very supportive. So there's a lot of peer coaching going on in Kagan-style activities. This is called a showdown. The idea being that you can see sentences in both languages, and again it explains across the sequence of lessons how to get the best out of this. So for example, once they've been working with sentence builders on the same topic areas, what children would do is pass the sheet around, and they may read a sentence out, and the other learners have got to say what it means. So again, it can be done from Spanish to French, or Spanish to English, or English to Spanish, for example. So that's called the showdown. And again, it can be done with mini whiteboards. This activity is a no snakes, no ladders activity. These activities tend to come towards the end of the year when children have done a lot of practice and revisited language. And this is obviously helping them to put it all together into sentences. So the idea being here that you print this off and that they study it, they move a counter across from the start to the finish. And if they can translate the sentence, they're allowed to shake the dice and move on, etc. So that would be the support sheet that the learners would pass on and look at if it wasn't their turn. And the idea being that if they don't get it right, the learner with the sheet reads it out, and then the child needs to try and memorize it for their turn, their next turn. So you can see lots of extra ideas. Now, these have been developed to support the stretch and challenge learners, But what Wendy and I are planning to do is to embed some of this into the standard scheme as well. So if you are thinking about sticking with the standard scheme, you might want the updated version because it will have some of these resources in there. Quiz Trade, this is a feature of our scheme currently, but just to explain it in a bit more detail for those of you who are less sure of how it works, the idea is that children are given a sentence in 2 languages, or it could even be just an individual word. Now, at the moment, in the standard scheme on the CDs, these are on documents, and the idea was that you would print them off and cut them up. But we know how busy we are as teachers, and so what we've decided to do now is to put it up on a PowerPoint slide. It can still be printed off, but equally there are different ways to practice other than doing the printing and cutting up. So if you were still doing Quiz Trade where the children are going to move around, I'll talk about how to use it in a minute, what you would do is, rather than cutting it up, get the children to write these phrases on mini whiteboards. So you could go around the room and give them a number, they would write their pair of phrases, and then the idea is that they walk around and they go and high-five each other. I suppose that's going to be difficult with social distancing next term potentially, but what we like them to do is to walk around, do choca in Spanish or topla in French. They hold their board up, show their phrase, or even read it out to a person opposite who has to then give the translation, and then it happens in reverse. So each learner is translating each other's sentence, but the important thing then is that they swap their sentences and then move to a different learner. That's why the word trade is in the game, Quiz Trade, the idea that they're swapping and moving on. So it's great for recycling language. Now, this particular version on the board here on the screen is one of the mixed age group ones. The idea being that the blue is for the younger learners, and then you've got the standard potentially in the middle, and then the higher level in green. So you can easily differentiate with it on the screen by giving the children different numbers. So in this instance, if you were doing it as Quiz Trade around the room, you would ask all the learners who've got numbers 1 to 10 to potentially trade in one area of the room, and then the orange in another, and the higher level or older children would do another breakout group. And it's fine if you have to give 2 learners the same pair of sentences, that's not a problem. The other thing you can do with this, and we've written this into the scheme, is that if you didn't want them to print it, didn't want to print it off, and if you didn't want them walking around the room, something that you can do is to get them to work in pairs. One learner faces away from the board and the other learner basically reads the sentences. So they could just do the 8, or rather the 10 that equates to their level. So they would read, for example, in the target language. The learner facing the back would give them the phrase in English. And what you could do is a bit of a game. So every time one of them got one wrong, they would swap roles. And they would keep swapping. And what you could do is say to the learner, you have to go back to the one you got wrong every time you swapped. But the whole idea is to get them to speak, to get them to listen, and to get them to recycle the language that they've learned. So I hope that makes sense. So just to finish off with, before we open for questions, where would our learners get to by the end of year 6? So daily routine is taught in year 6, along with school, hobbies, town, neighbourhood, giving more reasons, a wider range of opinions and reasons, and also children have fun doing the kind of role plays that now we use to test speaking at GCSE level. So these are great social contexts, asking and understanding directions, going into shops, and so we do build role plays into year 6. The type of grammar we cover, high frequency regular verbs. Wendy mentioned the verbs to be and to have, so they would learn more parts of that verb as they go through the year schemes. The high frequency irregular verbs, particularly ER verbs in French and AR in Spanish, as well as to have, to be, to go, to do, we have to play, to listen to watch, etc. past and future tenses, we tend to stick to key phrases like I went and it was, I did, I played. So we're not going too broad with the past and future tenses. In terms of the future, I am going to go, so the near future, and to link in an opinion, and it will be. And then question words are equally very, very important words. So again, we expose them to question words. We like them to go round and ask each other questions. We use quiz trades sometimes to really push question words. They're very important when they get to GCSE level. It's amazing how many year 10s and 11s struggle with question words. So the more they're embedded into their memory at Key Stage 2, the better. So I won't show you the different languages, but this is what we would hope a child would be able to do, a fairly able child, by the end of year 6. So in the first paragraph, you can see similar language to what we saw in year 3. So remember the recycling what they learned in the earlier years, their name, their age, where they live, describing their town. And then we've got a past tense in there. I went, it was. In the second paragraph, they're describing their home and they're giving colours, and they're also describing where things are located. So prepositions of place, they're giving opinions. In the third paragraph, we've got daily routine, we've got reflexive verbs in there, and we've got, we touch on food and an opinion. And then in the final section, going on to the subject of school, describing their favourite subjects, what they like, what they don't like, times of the day, and also how they spend time with family, and finishing off with a near future and a proper future. So I hope that gives you a flavour of how our scheme progresses. And now we're open to questions. So if you'd like to tap anything into the chat box, I'm just going to ask Wendy maybe to touch on where we are with updates for the East Riding, because you have a very special number of deals that aren't available to other schools out of your cluster. Wendy, do you want to add anything at this stage?
Yeah, so actually, Juliet, do you know what? I've forgotten what the deal is, but we have Kay very kindly negotiated for you a deal. I think it.
Wendy's sound's gone a bit iffy, I think. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I'm sure Sam and Kay will.
I don't want to guess it. I think it's
25%
discount.
It is 25. It is 25. Yes.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, it is 25%, Wendy.
Okay, great. I'm
glad each scheme. Yeah, that's right.
I'm glad I remembered that rightly. And I do understand from Kay that there are quite a lot of really small schools with mixed age classes, which must mean you have a lot less children and therefore smaller budgets. And we are very happy if you want to email us and say this is our position.
We've lost you again, Wendy.
We will certainly look at giving you a better discount as well on top of that. Am I okay there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we
can.
So
does it keep going?
No, you're okay.
So yeah, please do get in touch. And there was also a series of questions that Kay thought that you might want the answer to. So I'm just going to go through those. So in terms of if you're already using the scheme and you would like the upgrade, which includes the lesson plans with age-related expectations put into them, but also lots of new ideas that Juliet has mentioned, like sentence builders. We'll have things like, what else have we got in there that's new, Juliet? We've got some new micro-listening activities. We've got some speaking learners. We've got some better versions of quiz trade and more differentiated activities. So that is £25 per scheme. We don't do a subscription, so you're not paying a yearly fee. So when you do buy the scheme, it's a one-off purchase, and every few years, probably, and again another 3 or 4 years, we will probably do a bigger update. But again, we're trying to keep the costs small, so £25 per scheme. So you will get, if you do buy a scheme now, you'll get access to the full range. You can either choose the differentiated version, or you can choose the standard version. It's up to you which one you want, whichever suits you best. If you have bought the scheme recently in the last 3 to 4 months, we will make sure that you please just contact us, but we will give you access without paying anything extra to the online version. So that's absolutely fine. Again, just email us. Can the materials be downloaded easily, i.e. in one big download? Yes, if you get Google Drive, which is a free thing you can get. You just go on to, you just Google Drive actually. You can download it and it gives you a huge amount of storage. It's a really handy thing to have actually. I would recommend it just for your own personal things because it's saving your own stuff in the cloud where it can't get corrupted and things like that. So, but you can download and get everything that way. Yeah, I think those are the answers to the questions that we sort of predicted you might have. And if you've got any more, we'll just have a look in the chat function now.
One thing we have thought about in discussion with the various teachers, and I think, Wendy, you might have emailed Kay about it today, is we're conscious there's quite a lot of resources in each lesson folder. So what we're thinking of doing is kind of amalgamating some of the resources into less files. For example, if we put this into a PowerPoint and then we build in, say, some of the songs in there rather than having to open them as separate files, and that just might save time. The other thing is, and it would be really handy if people could type into the chat box, how many of you actually use interactive whiteboard dragging and dropping activities? Because we do have some interactive whiteboard activities where kids can come up to the front and move things around, but we don't know how many people are actually using that type of resource now. So if they're not really needed, not that we would get rid of them, but it would just be handy to know when we come to, if you like, shrink things down into less files. That would be handy to know. We have some questions coming in, Wendy. Do you want to have a look? It's £25 per year scheme, yes, for each update. So if you were going for all 4, I mean, most of you won't have invested in all 4 yet, I don't think, but it is £25 per year scheme.
So somebody has asked about how much are the workbooks. So we don't actually produce paper copies of the workbooks. We've got a digital version of them. And that means that you could print one copy out and get it photocopied, because obviously, as we know, these can be very prohibitive. Or you might look at it and think you don't want it, or you might just want some of the pages from it. So I do know there will be a certain cost to you in having it copied, but hopefully it won't be as much as if you were having to buy them separately. So yes, to purchase the upgrade, please just email hello@iLanguages and give us the name of your school and we will organise that.
I'm just checking actually, sorry, on my phone, I'm not texting, I promise. Oh, you can't see it. If you go onto the iLanguages scheme and you go to the purchase section, there is, it's been added today, where you can just go for the updates. It's a Spanish resources updates per pack. Yeah, that's all on the website now, but equally, just email Sharon at hello@iLanguages. She is aware that some of you will be contacting her this week. Any other questions? Kay, do you have anything you want to add while you've got all your cluster online? Please do come on if you've anything to add.
I don't think I have anything else to add. Just say thank you to everyone for giving up their afternoon and listening in. I think, you know, as we've said, you've done some great things with the resources and really made them perfect for mixed age classes, which obviously has been my experience. But even, you know, at the top end of year 6 for that stretch and challenge and for the support. So that's been great. Thank you. We've got another couple of questions. Where we'll be able to access the recording of today's webinar?
That will be everybody that registered via Eventbrite, because we've got the email list. We'll send you a link out. And that'll probably come out tomorrow or Monday at the latest.
That's lovely, thank you.
Somebody's asked about, so you would buy the update if you have already bought the scheme because everything's integrated in it. It's not like there's a separate folder of updates. Is everyone teaching languages in September? That's a good question because Yeah, I know. I'm trying to sort out bubbles for year groups and things like that, and it's just bonkers. But anyway, I'm not narrowing the curriculum in my school, so everybody is having their normal curriculum, and I do hope that's the case. But obviously, some of you might want to be doing a catch-up curriculum, so that would just be interesting if everyone is teaching languages or not.
Yeah. Can we answer Anna's question? How many differentiated schemes are there for mixed age classes? So what we've done, we've got the standard resources, and as we've mentioned, they're going to be updated this summer. But if you're teaching mixed age classes, then literally we've tried to cover as many eventualities as possible. So the year 3 scheme has got 2 levels built in, stretch and challenge. Year 4, as we kind of looked at the teaching and thought, do year 3s need support? Well, sometimes, because it's new language and it's still fairly basic at year 4, we felt that year 3 would cope with that. So then we've just done 1 level above for 5 and 6. So every year scheme either goes up or down, or both really, to provide the support. So year 3, 4, 5 and 6, there is a mixed age group scheme for each of those year groups, if that makes sense. Anything else? We've just got one person saying that they use interactive whiteboards. That's telling me perhaps not everybody else is. I know we had some feedback today that sometimes you're using Apple TVs for presentations, or some of you are using IWB. So we can keep that resource in. We certainly won't take it out. And that's good. That's good to hear. So for those of you who joined slightly late, just to reassure you, we have recorded this. And so anything you've missed at the very beginning, you'll be able to listen to when you get the link. The other thing to mention is if you do purchase this scheme and you go through the iLanguages website, please do mention you are an East Riding scheme. So Sharon, our admin assistant, knows straight away that you are eligible for your very special discount. Impure age groups are stretch and challenge providers. The stretch and challenge activities won't be in the standard scheme. They will be built into the mixed age scheme. Yes, we're pulling some of the resources across, but you know, if you really have got mixed age groups, you are better going down the mixed age scheme. Do ER schools also enjoy a reduction on the update costs? I'll throw that one to you, Wendy. There's an awful lot in there for £25.
Yeah, I would say that I do think that is a good deal, and given that we don't have a yearly subscription like a lot of places do, I think we'll stick it with the 25.
Okay, right, so we hope that was of use to all of you, and we look forward to continuing to work with the East Riding schools. As I say, we are doing a lot of audio recordings in the summer, so if you've just bought it and you've accessed the online version, be aware that things will be changing because it's live. As we're writing it, things will be changing, and we are moving things across to the standard scheme. But we can help you with the Google Drive and everything. Sharon will give you details if you need them. Thank you very much to Sam and Kay for sending the messages out for this webinar, and we look forward to hearing from you, and also have a brilliant summer. Thank you from both of us.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thanks, Juliet and Wendy. Thanks from everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.